right. Well, you guys, welcome back. If you are new here, we are the Habit team. The Habit is a nutrition coaching company made for women by women. Our program is built for you with coaches who put your goals, lifestyle, and personality first. If you want to learn more about us, head to the episode notes or go to thehabit.com. That's habit with a Y to either request more information or book your free discovery call.
So today you just got Coach Zan on the mic, and I wanted to chat about why our clients often quit early in a health journey and ultimately how to fix it. So we're going to be diving into a concept that honestly can completely change the way you coach, the way you diet, and the way you look at your own fitness and health journey. So what this concept is called is the peak end rule. And if you've ever had a client say, yeah, that diet just didn't work for me, or I couldn't stick with it, even when on paper everything looked super solid, this is probably why. So let's break this down in a really simple way. So the peak end rule is a psychological concept that basically says people don't remember experiences based on the average of the entire experience. What they do remember them based on is the most intense moment, and that is referred to as the peak, and then the ending. That's it. Not the middle, not the consistency, not the logical outcome, just the emotional high or low and how it finished. So basically, what this is saying is we judge past experiences just based on that peak moment and the end. And so, even if the experience was long and mostly neutral or mild, we'll still remember it based on how good or bad the most intense moment was and ultimately how we felt at the very end. So, duration doesn't matter as much as intensity and ending. So, I want to put this in a classic example. In one study, people were asked to put their hand in painfully cold water. So in one trial, they kept it in cold water for 60 seconds. But then in another trial, they kept it in cold water for 60 seconds plus 30 more seconds where the water was slightly warmer. Still uncomfortable temperature, but better than that painfully cold water they experienced those initial 60 seconds. So strangely, most people preferred the longer trial with more total discomfort because it ended on a less painful note. So it shows you that, again, duration didn't matter. They would rather experience 90 seconds of something uncomfortable rather than 60 seconds because of how the way it ended. So giving a quick example, just applicable to everyday life, someone going on vacation. The first 5 days, they were amazing. Day 6, you unfortunately get food poisoning. Day 7, you're traveling home. It's stressful, delayed flight, no sleep. You're still feeling awful from the food poisoning. So what do you say when someone asks you how the trip was? Most people aren't going to say, well, 5 out of the 7 days were great, so overall, I'm going to give it 71% it was positive. No, people are going to respond, honestly, it was kind of a mess. And that's the peak end rule in action. So even though the trip, for the most part, over 50% was really great and amazing, but because the end of the trip involved food poisoning, getting home, delayed flights while you're sick, that is what you're attaching majority of your memory to. So I wanted to just provide 2 just real life examples to show you how we really do experience and, basically recap our experiences based on the peak end rule. Now, tying this together, and let's bring this into a weight loss or just a health journey in general, because this is where it gets really, really interesting, at least for me. So again, I love all the psychology. It really helps you just understand how your brains operate and why you may think and reflect the way that you do, which is why I wanted to do this for an entire episode, because it really is important to understand this. Most people assume success in fat loss comes down to whether they're staying in their caloric deficit, whether they're hitting their macros, whether they're working out consistently, and whether they're just basically instilling these lifestyle habits consistently throughout a week. And yes, of course, those matter. But what people remember about their journey and whether they'll ever do it again is what comes down to the hardest, most painful moments and ultimately how the journey ends. So I want you to think about it. If someone goes through, let's say, a 16-week cut, a 16-week caloric deficit, let's say weeks 1 through 10, super smooth, making progress, feeling really good. Weeks 11 through 14, hunger begins to spike, energy becomes a little bit lower, and you're feeling a little restricted in terms of your social life. And then weeks 15 and 16, you're burnt out, you're exhausted, maybe you've even had a couple of binge episodes. And even though this person has lost about 15 to 20 pounds and had a very good experience overall, their takeaway is that this sucks. I failed. I never want to do this again. And what happens next? They regain the weight, they avoid dieting again, and then they associate fat loss with suffering. They believe there's no way they'll ever be able to lose weight while having a social life. They believe that, every time they diet, they are going to experience excruciating hunger and low energy, and just everything feels harder than it really needs to be. But in reality, this person really only experienced that maybe the last 3 weeks of their 16-week journey, pretty much forgetting all of the positives and the wins that they experienced for the better half of the 16 weeks. So let's talk about the peak first. In weight loss, the peak is usually the most uncomfortable part of the process. So this could be anywhere between extreme hunger, low energy, social isolation, like I just mentioned, feeling restricted, like feeling they have to be rigid with their food choices, plateau frustration, we've all been there, and overly aggressive caloric deficits. So here's the issue. A lot of people unintentionally design their programs to create brutal peaks. So I want you to think about you're slashing calories way too drastically. You add excessive cardio because you think that, okay, when your weight loss stalls, then you have to work out even more. You remove all of your fun foods, the foods that you enjoy and you look forward to, and you feel like you just have to eat super bland and the same things every single day. And then you push adherence to perfection. So sure, you might get faster results at the beginning, but you're also creating a negative emotional spike that the brain is going to ultimately lock into. And the brain doesn't go, yes, this was effective. It's actually going to go, that was miserable. Don't do it again. So I actually did a podcast episode about self-sabotage. And so I really, really recommend going back, re-listening to that because this can be very similar. Your brain will always, always remember the behaviors, the moments, the experiences that brought you pain, that brought you negative emotions. And your brain always is going to do whatever it can to basically protect you from ever experiencing those painful emotions again. So with this person, they ended their 16-week cut, not in a positive note. And now your brain is attaching, okay, well, dieting equals me being miserable, so I don't want to do it again. So inevitably, this person gains the weight back and is reluctant to ever try to diet again. So that is how your brain basically positions your experience. So now let's talk about the second piece, the end. This might be the most overlooked part of any fat loss journey because most people treat the end like this. All right, I hit my goal weight, I'm done. But then what happens? Your structure disappears, your routine becomes inconsistent, calories jump up randomly, old habits start to creep in, and the scale ultimately starts climbing back up. So what does the brain remember? Not the 12 weeks of progress. It remembers, well, I gained all of my weight back. So now the entire experience gets labeled as ineffective, unsustainable and just simply not worth it, even if it technically worked. So again, I'm emphasizing the experience, the most intense moment, the peak, and then how this weight loss journey ended. And it ended in weight rebound. So now your brain is attaching to that piece. So, why most diets fail? When you look at dieting through the peak end rule, you start to realize something. Most diets fail not because they don't work, but because they're remembered poorly. They're either create extreme peaks, so too aggressive, too restrictive, or they end poorly. There was no transition, let's say, into maintenance. There was no exit strategy of getting out of a caloric deficit and how to continue living your life. There was no instilling of lifestyle habits so that this continued to be a part of your routine. So people aren't avoiding fat loss because they're lazy. They're avoiding repeating an experience their brain tagged as painful and pointless. So how to apply this, whether you're a coach or whether you're an individual that's in their health loss journey. How do we actually use this, basically, this peak end rule, now that we understand what it is and how it can be applied to a health journey? So I want to make it practical. Number one, we want to reduce the negative peaks. So this doesn't mean make fat loss easy, because it won't be, right? There's always going to be challenges in a fat loss journey. But what it does mean is we're going to avoid unnecessarily aggressive deficits. You don't have to slash your calories. You can actually be in a very moderate deficit and, still be able to enjoy life. Keep food flexibility in place. So again, not being too rigid with your food choices. Picking foods that you enjoy so that you learn portion control and how to navigate eating these foods without overindulging. Manage hunger strategically. So thinking about the different tricks as, volume foods, meal timing, meal prepping, planning, just adding in that strategy and that intention. And then keep steps high instead of just slashing calories. So, I use the example of a lot of people end up over exercising when they hit a plateau. They feel like, okay, the only way I can burn extra calories is to over exercise, when in fact, getting your steps in and just moving your body outside of exercise and just making sure you're not sedentary the 23 other hours of the day outside of that structured exercise, you will absolutely continue being in a caloric deficit. But that is a tangent. That could be a whole other podcast, and we absolutely have done one on walking in steps and the importance behind it. But overall, the goal is make the hardest part manageable, not miserable. Because if the peak is tolerable, the most intense moment, the whole experience becomes repeatable. So number 2, you want to create positive peaks. So number 1 was obviously reducing the negative peaks, but then how can we create positive peaks? So here's something people don't talk about enough. You can absolutely design positive peaks too. Moments like hitting a weight milestone, feeling confident in your clothes, getting stronger in the gym, social wins such as going out and still staying on track while you're eating out with your friends. And these matter, these non-scale victories, which is something we really push all of our clients to kind of dive deep within, really matter and absolutely can change the perspective of your health journey, because these emotional highs will get remembered. So now, instead of that sucked, I was miserable, it becomes, honestly, there were some really solid moments. This calorie deficit really wasn't as miserable as I thought it was going to be. So that's how you can create more positive peaks. Now, next, you want to engineer the ending, right? Because that's the other moment that people attach to. So this is the really, really big one. If you want someone to keep their results, you need to finish the diet properly. What that means is reverse dieting, going into maintenance mode, with controlled calorie increases, transitioning to maintenance intentionally, understanding the importance of maintenance, what you need to be focusing on during maintenance, and why that phase is just as important as a deficit phase. keeping your structure, not abandoning it. So when you're in a fat loss phase, you absolutely have to build a structure, a routine, because our bodies thrive off of repeatable actions. And so just because you're exiting a fat loss phase and going into maintenance mode doesn't mean we have to ditch that structure entirely. Maybe it looks a little different than a fat loss phase, but structure still needs to be there. Because if you don't have structure, your brain will absolutely look for loopholes and look for ways to get around. And then it begins to think that this is a free for all. So structure needs to remain whatever phase that you're in. The goal ultimately is for the person to finish and think that actually felt sustainable. We have a lot of clients who start their fat loss or weight loss journey with the habit, and 9 out of 10 times we have women literally say, I don't even feel like I'm dieting. Like, I just went out with my girlfriends. I had Mexican food. I had margaritas, whatever it is, because we're teaching you how to build this into your lifestyle, how to navigate these situations. And that is what makes it feel sustainable. These clients who come to us that say, I barely even feel like dieting, are also the ones that are more patient. Because if you are engaging in these social activities, yes, you have to understand that fat loss may not come as quickly, but it is important to implement these social things and whatever else it might be, so that your brain understands every time you're in a fat loss phase, you don't have to be miserable, you don't have to isolate yourself, and you can still have fun and live your life. So if the ending feels like relief from suffering, you're going to go right back to old habits. So we want to focus on ending in a positive note so that your brain realizes, okay, that was an overall positive experience, and I'm absolutely open to doing it again in the future. Number 4, you don't want to rush the finish line. So like I was just saying, those that are patient, those that understand sustainability is the name of the game, are the ones that are always going to see more success. A huge mistake is pushing harder right at the end. So people think, let's just grind these last 2 to 3 weeks because I still have 5 to 10 more pounds to lose and I'm not ready to go into maintenance mode, whatever it might be. This happens a lot. We get a lot of client pushback because they haven't reached their goals yet. But if their bodies are screaming at them and it's ready to be out of a deficit, do not ignore it, because that is what's creating the suffering at the very end. So if you try to grind and push beyond what your body is asking for, that is what's going to create the worst peak and a very, very terrible ending. So instead, the smartest move is pull up calories slightly, begin reverse dieting, go to maintenance, honor what your body's asking for, reduce that fatigue, and let yourself finish feeling in control. You may not have hit all of your weight loss goals, but that's okay. We put a little pin in it. We push the pause button. We reset your body in maintenance. And then again, your brain is going to be more open to getting back into a deficit because it did not end your first deficit on a negative note. Ultimately, if we zoom out, success in fat loss isn't just how much weight you lost or how fast you lost it. It's really, would you be willing to do it again? That is the real test. Because if the answer is no, then it wasn't sustainable and your brain is remembering, obviously, the worst moments. And if the answer is yes, then you've built something that's repeatable. And that is the more important piece of this whole thing. So next time you're thinking about your own journey or coaching someone else, ask yourself, what is the hardest moment going to feel like? And how is this going to end? Because those two things will define your entire experience. Not the spreadsheets, not the macros, and not even the results. The peak end rule is always running in the background. And if you use it intentionally, you don't just get results, you get results that actually stick. So that is what the peak end rule is, and why it is so important to, again, continue to learn and understand how our brains operate so that you can get ahead of it and create more positive peaks and ends in your weight loss journey so that you never have to start over again.